All right, what's up, everybody? The goal of this is what I'm going to do is to just kind of run through the study for 8.1.1, just to kind of guide you through this. Hopefully, you've already looked at this stuff, but I'm not going to sit here and read everything. But I'm just going to run through some of the key terms. I looked at the quiz and just kind of see or try and highlight the things that are important. Bear with me. This will probably be a little clunky. Obviously, it's the first time I've done it. So let's go ahead and get started. Public policy. What is public policy? It's essentially any law, regulation, funding put towards an issue that the government enacts. What we're going to do is look at the process of policy making. There's 3 key steps, and also focus on that on the national or federal, state, and local level. One area that we've talked about in class, we kind of missed it this year with the early dismissal, I suppose, but the American Disabilities Act is a big, good example of public policy. So we move on. First, I ask you to define public policy versus private action. Pretty simple concept. Public policy is anything that's a result of government action. So it's a law that was created or it's funded by the government. So if you look down at this table here, things like, where is it? Offering free flu shots at a school. That's a school, publicly funded place, public policy. Inspecting meat for bacteria. That's something that's done by the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, public policy. Training police officers. They're, extension of the government. That's public policy. Private action are things that you do on your own. So joining a gym to stay fit, starting a new restaurant, adopting a sweet little cat or a psycho dog, in our case, from an animal shelter, are all examples of private action. Moving on to the next page. Who makes the policy? Well, it's often elected officials. When someone runs for office, whether it be my wife is being a butt and recording me, record myself. When someone runs for office, whether it be a president, a governor, whoever, they often are, running on these policies that they're proposing. So if I'm running for governor, I might say I want to fund education and fund more schools. And then if I am elected, which obviously I would win, I'll have these bureaucrats, this keyword right here, who have an expertise in particular areas, and they would help me create policies and write proposals to try and achieve these goals that I've set out to do. So the difference between an elected official and a professional policymaker, elected officials are actually chosen by the people. They're going to focus on a bunch of different issues, whereas a policymaker isn't really elected. Maybe it's hired by me after I've won office, and they'll usually have an expertise in one area. So there's 2 areas that policy is divided into. Domestic policy. Domestic means at home, so in the U.S., and foreign policy means obviously dealing with other countries. So let's take a quick look at these different areas of public policy. First, economic policy. That's how a particular government, whether it's at the local, state, or national level, regulates money, essentially. What are the tax rates? What are interest rates for people to borrow money? Are both examples of economic policy, kind of dealing with the economy. Social policy. These are programs designed to often help people through financial aid or through the education system or healthcare. So Social Security, which we did talk about this year, is a great example of social policy, provides assistance for the elderly. Financial assistance for the low income would be a good example. Providing funding for education is an example of social policy. We go ahead and look at criminal justice policy. This has to do with how we deal with people who break the law. Obviously, some states are more strict than others. Some states use the death penalty, some don't. That's a good example of criminal justice policy. Sentencing can be different in states. So stealing a car in one state might be a larger sentence than stealing a car in another state. And also laws involving police can differ from state to state. Trial procedures can differ, so those all have to do with criminal justice policy. Land use policy. I know we're getting exciting here. We're talking land use, folks. Land use is having to do with zoning laws, and we did a big project with zoning and land use this year. If you remember, we did the Urban Sprawl project where you guys created those little villages on your maps, and they grew and grew and grew. So land use has to do with where you want to put houses and where you want to put businesses. Many of you, if you live in a house, a townhouse, an apartment, you probably don't live next door to a 7-Eleven. That's because you are in a residentially zoned area, and you also have business zoned areas. So, all of 301 there for the most part, you got all those businesses. There's not like a big house next to Best Buy. Those are all businesses. Traditionally with land use, you want to be kind of smart with development use strategies so you're not cramping everything together or polluting the environment. Not saying that always happens, though. Environmental policy, good segue here. Environmental policy are regulations that have to do with pollution and what harms the environment. Cars are a great example. 50 years ago, they didn't have regulations on types of engines you could use and how much pollution they're spitting out into the earth. Now, you have to get your car approved by the state of Maryland to ensure that it is not causing too much pollution. If you've ever been with your mom or dad or your parent or guardian, and you might have gone through that process where they check the emissions on a car. If I have my own shoe business, the government ensures that I'm not creating too much pollution as I produce these shoes. I'm not spitting off crappy chemicals into the local water sources. So those are all environmental policies. And then finally, foreign policy. This traditionally has to do with our national government. Maryland doesn't really have foreign policy. This is a national government issue. And do we provide financial aid to countries that need it for food and assistance? Do we get involved with a global issue? The U.S. in the last 50 to 100 years has traditionally been very involved in foreign affairs, and that has to do with our foreign policy. One president might be promoting getting involved in other countries and trying to trade a lot with other countries, while another president may kind of put America first, as they often say, and kind of ignore or don't get involved in foreign affairs. I gotta speed this up. All right, so we look at this little fill in the blank. Policy makers are people who have blank expertise in a specific field that helps them, let's say, solve problems. That sounds right. Boom, boom. All right, next. So there's many steps to public policy. You have to pass the laws. You have to create these regulations. You have to organize these government agencies to take action. The first one is formulation. And it seems on your quizzes they really focus on these three steps. Formulation is just the idea. We've all formulated an idea before, and with policy you have to formulate that idea. So let's say in the case of the American Disabilities Act, someone thought, hey, people in wheelchairs traditionally, throughout history haven't really received equal treatment. Let's create laws to help those people not get discriminated from jobs, from public places. We've done the same with minorities and women in the past. So the idea is formulation, the idea of creating a policy. Debate and adoption. Legislators, lawmakers, people in Congress, they debate these proposals. So when it's formulated and proposed, legislatures will kind of tinker with and adjust these laws to maybe be more agreeable to all different political parties. Before policy can be implemented, legislatures have to pass it. That's at the local, state, and national level. And then implementation. Once a law is passed or adopted, as they say, the executive branch is in charge of enforcing the law. So again, in the American Disabilities Act, one of the big things they did with that was they made you have ramps at all public places. So once that law was passed, it was up to the executive branch to get out there and say, all right, you need ramps at these schools so that people in wheelchairs can get into the building. Formulation, this again is kind of going through what is formulation. It's the idea of what your idea to create policy. As we can see, the National Council on Disability is an independent executive agency. They came up with a lot of what has to do with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Next one, adoption and debate. Again, when a law is proposed, it rarely passes through unchanged. The legislative branch will often tinker with it, will adopt new measures. They have different committees to talk about things. And so if you look right here, it says the American Disabilities Act, for example, went through several committees with Congress, and you see all the different committees there. So it's often reviewed and changed quite a bit, and that's just kind of how our government rolls. Implementation. All right, so it's passed through. The law has made it through, which is already rare in itself. Excuse me. So that involves government agencies getting out there and implementing these new laws. So with the American with Disabilities Act, the Departments of Justice, Labor, Transportation, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the FCC, they all got involved. And we can see the Supreme Court was there too. We'll skip that. All right, so during the blank stage, new policies are proposed. That would be the formulation stage. New policies to protect the rights of disabled Americans were proposed by the agency of the executive branch. Did I get it right? Bang, bang. Moving on. Let's see. Looking at the different levels of government, LSN, local, state, national. That's the title of this class. So obviously the federal government can create an act or a law, but then it's often up to state and local governments to implement some of those things. So if you look here, many areas of domestic policy are in the hands of state, local governments, like family law. Education is a big state decision area, and land use. Shared responsibilities, criminal laws, taxes, welfare programs are all shared. And the federal government obviously controls foreign policy. States can't really have a say in that. I got to get this moving. I'm trying to keep this under 15 minutes. Policy at the state and local levels. Again, I mentioned education. That is a huge area where state and local governments get to decide how they want to do things. If you go to school in Maryland, it's going to be a little different than if you go to school in West Virginia. Curriculum and funding are debated by school boards, whose members are often elected by the community. Now, it's important to remember that policy making at the state and local level does follow the same three stages at the federal level: formulation, debate and adoption, and then finally implementation. Also important to note here, the Constitution does not grant the federal government the power to operate schools, so the national government should not be getting too involved with local and state schools. Next, the role of bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are, not all of them, but some of them are policymakers. These people are experts, so let's say, for example, when I'm old, 30 years down the line, I'm 60-some years old, I'm not teaching anymore. Maybe I work for the government as someone who works to create new laws with education. Because I have a background in education, I would be maybe an expert in education, and I could offer some advice on how to create new policies with education. And so bureaucrats are often involved at the implementation stage of policymaking. So moving on, a couple more slides. Review. The policymaking process begins with formulation. Remember that, it probably is a quiz question. This is when policymakers take an idea, turn it into a proposal. Obviously goes to debate and adoption, and then into implementation. So you guys can figure this out yourself. Moving on. It seems like they're really banging home this point of formulation to debate and adoption by the legislature and to the implementation of the policy. Remember how the three branches of government get involved with this. You have the executive branch, who often proposes a policy. The legislative branch is there to approve or change or shift the ideas of the policy. And then the implementation also has to do with the executive branch. Now, the judicial branch can get involved if someone challenges the policy. If someone didn't like the idea of requiring ramps in public places, that person sounds like a jerk, but if they were there, maybe it could go to court, and then the Supreme Court or the local courts could decide if the ramps in public places as a requirement is constitutional. Again, relatively straightforward three-stage process. Make sure you understand the difference between formulation, adoption, and implementation. And on to the last page. Boom! I think that's it. That was the first one. It is at 14 minutes and counting. So I said I'd try and keep it under 15. I think this is what I kind of want to do, is just kind of highlight the key points as we roll through these studies. So I'll do the next one soon and go ahead and post it. Have a great day. And give me a second while I figure out how to stop this recording. There it is. Goodbye.